So when it comes to weathering, maybe we need to apply a little bit of Star Wars philosophy. Hey, I'm John. Thanks for joining me for this video today. Something that I see all the time in social media is some variation of, I need to try to learn weathering. And they'll go on and talk about, they've built this model and they would really like to weather it, but they've just never really done it. And so you see that over and over. I need to try and learn weathering. I need to try and learn weathering. I've been keeping track of this. When I started thinking about making this video, I've been keeping track of it. I see it at least 3-4 times a week for the past month on most of the Facebook groups that I'm on, or forums, or other online venues like that. I see it over and over and over again, so it's a very common theme. Now, I'll admit, in part, I don't quite get it because I can do some weathering. I've done weathering, I'm comfortable with weathering, and like most things, when we're comfortable with them, we don't get why someone else might not be. So there's that part of it, but then I also get, okay, there's things that I don't do because they kind of intimidate me. And so I can also see why some people look at the weathering process and may think, well, this is just something I can't do. For example, when I see folks doing lighting on their models, I just look at that, and to me, that's like this dark, mysterious art. I haven't done any lighting. I don't have the stuff to do lighting. I don't really know how to do lighting. I mean, I know you have to have, some kind of bulb and some kind of electric cable, and they hook together, and you drill little holes, and it takes a lot of time, and I don't like spending a lot of time. But, so I get that when there's something you're not doing, that seeing it done can often be a little intimidating. So I get it, but then again, I don't. And the reason I say I don't is weathering is really just more paint. That's all it is. It may be thinner paint, it may be paint with some chunks in it, it may be paint applied in very thin layers, but really, weathering is just more paint. It's just paint of a different color. It's usually a lot of browns and oranges and yellows and stuff like that, but it can be any color. So I think that there was a book that I read as a kid. Some of you may have seen this. I don't even know if it's still around. I need to see if I can find it for my grandson. Anyway, it starred Grover, and from Sesame Street. And he kept talking about, as you went through this book, he would ask you to please stop turning the pages because there's a monster at the end of the book. And he didn't want to get to the book because, well, there's a monster there, and so you would keep turning the pages. And at first he was like, hey, there's a monster at the end of the book. Please don't turn any more pages. Then you turn a page and he'd go, okay, look, maybe you're not getting it. There's a monster at the end of the book. And as you kept going further and further through it, he's getting a little more desperate. He's doing his Grover thing, near, far. But he's doing this Grover thing. And he's telling you, look, there's a monster at the end of the book. Don't turn the page. And then you finally get to the next to the last page, and he's just desperate. And you turn the page, and he goes, oh, wait, the monster at the end of the book is me. There was nothing to be afraid of. And I think that's the way it is with weathering. There's really nothing to be afraid of to keep you from trying it. So when it comes to weathering, I think it's important to look to another one of Frank Oz's characters, and that would be Yoda. And you remember in Empire Strikes Back what he said? He said, do or do not. There is no try. Now, yeah, that may sound a little oversimplistic, but there's a lot of deep truth to that. You can, of course, read books about weathering. You can watch videos about weathering. You can buy all the stuff that needs to be used for weathering. You can practice on spoons, you can practice on milk jugs, you can practice on pieces of plastic. But until you actually take a model and start applying weathering to it, you will never learn weathering. You don't learn weathering by learning, you learn weathering by doing. Okay, I won't do that anymore. Now, I've heard a number of reasons why people say that they just can't get started in weathering. I think the number one reason that I hear from people is, I'm worried I'm going to ruin my model. And I understand that, because I feel the same way about doing certain things. You know, like right now, I'm starting to focus a little more time on learning the techniques that you need to have for figure painting. You know, the little Star Wars Legion kind of minis, the Warhammer minis, things like that. I like doing that. And they have their own set of skills and, you know, hand control and brush control and things like that that you really need to have in order to do that pretty well. So I've been practicing it quite a bit and learning a lot from it. But there's a couple of figures that I have that kind of in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I don't want to start painting those because I don't want to mess them up. And as I was working on doing this video, taking my notes and putting them into the computer over here and doing all that stuff, I started thinking about, well, you need to take your own advice. You need to quit worrying about, because I'm not going to mess the model up. If I start painting it and it just turns out to be an entire just hack job, just the paint, the details, everything just looks awful. I just botch it up completely. You know what I can do? Because I'm using acrylic paints, I can dip that thing in a cup of alcohol overnight and come back the next morning, scrub it all off and start over. So I'm not suggesting you do that every time you don't like the look of your model. But what I am suggesting is that fear of messing up the model shouldn't be holding you back. A second thing that I see people worry about is this fear of doing something wrong, which, you know, I understand if you're flying a jet airliner or you're doing brain surgery, a fear of doing something wrong is probably a healthy fear. You know, that's a good thing to have. But when it comes to plastic models, I would encourage you not to let fear of doing something wrong be such an obstacle, because in the years that I've been modeling, I've found that making mistakes is often one of the best ways to learn. I haven't learned how to apply weathering products the right way quite often by doing it the right way the first time. I think I'm doing it the right way, and then I do it and I go, oh, that wasn't optimal. Well, let me change to this other way. And so, you know, this monster at the end of the book of doing something wrong, I think you just have to step around that and go, okay, that's not something I should fear. In any learning process, you're gonna do some things right, you're gonna do some things wrong. You learn from what you do right, you learn from what you do wrong, and you adjust and go forward. So I would say that just let that fear vanish. Put that out of your mind. It's a learning process, and you don't need to fear mistakes. Another objection that I see that people have to why they haven't started weathering their models is they're worried it's not going to be realistic. Now, I get that to a certain degree, because when I was doing aircraft modeling, you know, I wanted my weathering to be realistic. Maybe not the amount of weathering being realistic, but the patterns and appearances and things like that. You know, so I learned that, okay, over the top of the wings of an aircraft, you don't want to just have mud everywhere, because mud wouldn't get on it in great volumes like it does, say, around the treads of a tank. So I understand that thinking about realism, but realism is something that's down the road when it comes to weathering. You have to start the journey first to kind of see what's going to be appropriate in terms of realism. And at the same time, I don't think that if you're having fun with it, that realism should be as big a concern. Now, if you're doing a model for a contest or something like that, yeah, maybe. But my guess is if you're doing a model for a contest, you've probably done some of these things before and you're more comfortable with it. So again, going back to that monster at the end of the book, don't let realism trip you up in something that could be a lot of fun otherwise. Now, one more objection that I've heard, and there's more than this, but these are like the big four that I hear. But this one I say it not only applies to learning to weather, but anything. I've heard more than a few people express to me, through messages, emails, whatever, that their concern with learning to weather is what people online are going to say about it. And to that, I would just say, stop. Just stop worrying about that. We let the socials drive our thinking far too much. Yeah, it's nice to get feedback that tells you, yeah, I see you're trying to put some mud on there. That looks pretty good. You may want to try a couple of different colors of mud. That can turn out even better. I'm not saying that we don't, seek constructive help, the old CNC welcome. But at the same time, having a fear of, well, what if somebody says something I don't like? What if somebody says something that's not nice? I would say do one of two things. Either ignore it, because it's social media. It doesn't matter. So either ignore it or just don't post the stuff. There have been times I've been, going back to the figure painting that I was talking about earlier, there have been a lot of figures that I've been working on over about the last 6 months that I don't post pictures, I don't show them in videos, I don't blog about them. I may send a photo to a friend and say, what do you think? But it's work where, okay, this is meant to be a learning process. This is meant to be something that's kind of an experiment as I go along the road. So don't let fear of social media stop you from doing this weathering, from trying this weathering, because it's just not worth it.
Fear leads to the dark side.
Okay, I said I wasn't going to do that anymore. I lied. All right, so Mr. YouTube man, you've gone on and on and on about what to not be afraid of and all these other things. What do you recommend I do if I want to weather? Good question. I'm glad you asked. The first thing I would say is to overcome that whole fear of, well, I don't want to mess up my model. Find a cheap model. Find a model that you've got up in your stash that's been sitting there and you're thinking, I bought it thinking I wanted to build it and then I just never really got excited about it. Okay, that's one that you don't mind messing up on. If budget is a thing and you don't have additional models just laying around to experiment on, go to the dollar store. Go to the Goodwill store, the secondhand store. Pick up a plastic toy that's made of, hard styrene plastic and bring that home and prime it and paint it and then weather the heck out of it. Strip it off, do it again. Make that what I call a test mule. You just use it for all sorts of paint and testing and things like that. It gets around the whole budget question. It gets around the whole, I don't want to ruin this model, and gives you a palette to do actual weathering on, because even a toy is going to have angles and surfaces and textures and things like that that you can chip, that you can add mud to, that you can add rust to, and you don't have to worry about, does it mess up a model that I paid some good money for? Even a model that you've already finished, there may be one or two sitting up on your shelf that are just really collecting dust. And you may have some fondness for how they turned out. But if you really want to learn to weather, maybe take that old model, clean the dust off, take a few pictures of it so you can remember what it looks like before it was weathered, and then start weathering the thing. I know I said it kind of jokingly, but really when it comes to weathering, it is do or do not. There is no try. Another thing I would recommend is picking some simple weathering techniques to start with. Having kind of a playlist of what you want to do to start with will help you. It'll keep everything kind of in focused and give you a manageable chunk to work with. I did a video about what I called my weathering playlist, and it's just me kind of sitting in a format like this rambling on about weathering, but it kind of goes into detail about the process I go through when I'm thinking of my weathering. So that may be helpful to you. I'm sure there's other videos, plenty of videos on YouTube that would be helpful to you. And I've also, just to plug myself a little more, I've also put together a playlist of every video that I've done that has anything to do with weathering. That may be helpful also. But picking a few techniques, like let's say you've got a model and you say, okay, to start with, I just want to do light weathering on this thing. So maybe you just start with some chipping and maybe a few streaks or oil stains or something like that. Arm yourself with the information on how to do it, and then flip the model over on the underside or where someone's not going to see, some place that you can just start doing it, and say, okay, in this one little part, I'm going to do some chipping and I'm going to see what works and what doesn't. And then just begin expanding that across the model. I always recommend starting off small. Don't try and go for this just massively chipped model, for example. Do a little bit of chipping. Figure out how, if you're using, say, acrylic paints, figure out, do I need to thin them any more than I already have? Are they too thin? What colors work well together? All of those things will be information that will inform your journey about how to weather and how to get better at weathering. So pick something small, start with it, and go. A third idea I would recommend is pick a target. In other words, find somebody who has done some weathering that you like, that you're impressed with. It may be a friend's model, it may be a picture you've seen on the net, it may be a video, whatever. Pick a target and try your best to copy it. Now, before you drop a comment and go, well, you should never copy anybody's work. Everything we do in learning is copying somebody. I mean, when we're learning to write, we copy everybody before us who knew how to write, right? Right? How many times can I say right? Anyway, pick something to copy. I've always heard that's how the apprentices who worked for the great painters, that's how they learned to paint. There's old Leonardo da Vinci and his apprentice Bob, and Bob's sitting there going, well, what you want me to do there? And Leonardo da Vinci says, why don't you go over there and paint that Mona Lisa picture I got? See that one over there? Yeah, just copy that. He probably didn't have a southern accent, but that's the only one I'm really good at. Certainly not good at the Yoda accent. But anyway, that's how they learn to paint. So pick a target and copy it. Find out, how did they do that? And you look at what they did, and you look at what you're doing, and you just keep working until the two look fairly close. You may not get it the first time right off the bat 100%, but you'll discover in putting your stuff on your model and looking at the other model, you'll discover, okay, what's different. That's where the learning really begins to happen. So pick something to copy, and that's going to be a lot easier and help you out a lot more as you learn to weather. A final thing I would say as you begin a weathering journey, and I say this from my own experience, is try and avoid the trap of thinking you did really good the first time. I ran into that. The first couple of times I tried weathering a model, And I took it to my local club meeting and I showed it to people, and everybody was like, wow, man, that's awesome. I mean, they were really just telling me how great it was, how wonderful it was. And I'm sitting back going, yeah, I got this weathering thing down. I still got some of those models, and I look at them now. I mean, yeah, they look like somebody who had never weathered a model, had his first or second try at weathering a model. They look like they're supposed to look. But what I saw when I looked at them and what reality was were two different things. So I'm not saying don't look at your work and have some satisfaction. You know, I'm not proposing that you look at your work and go, well, it's just automatically awful. I must do better. You know, be realistic about it. You know, you can, and that's why I think that, going back to the previous point about picking somebody to emulate, that really helps you, because you can look at your work and you can go, wow, that looks pretty good, man. And then you look at the one that you're emulating and you go, oh, wow, okay, I still got a ways to go. So don't unnecessarily beat yourself up, but don't fall for that trap of, well, I just smeared some Tamiya weathering powders all over this model and I'm going to count it as the most fabulous weathering ever. Because I've seen that. And I've even had people send me photos and say, what do you think? What do you say? You know, it looks like a 4-year-old blew their nose on it. How can you be encouraging when someone has done something for the first time and they think it's the best ever? So look at your stuff objectively. Look at it with an eye towards, what can I improve? No matter how much modeling you've done, no matter how much experience you have, you should always be looking to improve, to learn something more, to try and get it even better. I guarantee you, you could ask any of the top modelers in the world. You pick a name, whoever in your mind you think is at the top of the modeling heap. You could go and ask them and say, okay, so have you learned everything there is to know and you apply it 100% and you have no room for growth? And they're going to laugh. They're going to say, no, I learned something new every day. It may be incremental growth. It may be smaller growth the longer you do it. But you're constantly learning new refinements, new ways of doing it, new products, whatever. So always look to grow. And the way you do that growth is by looking at your stuff objectively. Well, I hope this video has been an encouragement to help you if you're starting on the journey of weathering, or you're even still just considering starting on the journey of weathering. That this has given you some ideas to think about, some encouragement to not just stand there on square one and say, but you know, what if? Because it really is a case of do or do not. You don't try to learn anything. You either learn it or you don't. And this isn't brain surgery. This isn't rocket science. This is just putting paint on a model. So overcome those fears. Don't worry about what other people say. Look at your resources. Pick a target that you want to emulate and just start doing it. The fun will be in the process of learning. Well, thank you so much for watching this video, especially if you're still hanging around at this point. I always appreciate the folks that hang around towards the very end, especially with all the bad Yoda jokes that me and Mr. Stick have been doing. I'd like to thank my co-star, Mr. Stick. He performed wonderfully. Not me so much, but he did a great job. Anyway, thanks for hanging around, and I appreciate it. Now, if you've not already done so, there is a subscribe link that I believe is down over here. So if you would be so kind as to hit that subscribe link and the little bell icon so that you'll know when I have new videos out. Also, if you would give this video a thumbs up and just drop in a comment, that would really help me. I'm trying to grow the channel, and leaving a like and leaving a comment on a video really helps the content creator grow their channel. It truly does. So, and shares on social media too. So I would appreciate your help in that regard. There's also links down below to the other social media platforms that I'm on. There's also a link to my blog. And then finally, there's a link to my Patreon account if you would like to look at that. If you're already a Patreon supporter, thank you so much for the support that you provide that allows me to do this video. And finally, as I always like to do, I'll leave you with one final thought. In this hobby, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.
This is my stick. There are many like it, but this one is mine.